who was happy. And then I had an automobile accident, and someone ran into the back of my nice little sports car. And I ended up with quite a serious back injury. And I was thinking now, what am I going to do? This has really changed my life. I've been an active person. And somehow someone put me onto yoga. And this is a long time ago. Yoga was not that popular. This is late 60s. So, this body's quite old. So, I took up the yoga, but what I discovered, yes, and to this day I have to take care of my back because I fractured my spine. But I discovered that my very hypersensitive nervous system was also feeling very calm and relaxed, and I thought, oh, I want to feel like this way all the time. Enough of this fashion business and traveling, I'm going to become a yoga teacher. And then I saw a sign on a tree, you know, it would be like a tree here. I just saw a sign, in New York, yoga teachers training. And it was up in Canada with the Shivananda group, so I went to the teachers training. And then I opened a center for them in San Francisco. And one of the things that our students, it was right adjacent to a medical training university. And many of our students were doctors, so they were right very early on wanting to do research on the effects of yoga. This is a long time ago. Now there's a lot of research on the effects of yoga, which makes us all so happy because, yes, everything that we know is true. Now they're saying, you know, they have the research to prove it. And of course, yoga is much more incorporated now into the medical tradition, particularly US. Australia is quite strong in that way, but each country has its own insurance, you know, requirements for trainees. So as to me, India, the yoga I studied in India was always therapeutic. So, but it's a different approach now. So one teacher came to San Francisco, Swami Muktananda, and someone introduced me, and we invited him to our center, and he came to our center. And I looked at this joyful man who didn't speak any English, only Hindi, and he was so full of joy and so full of love. I thought, now that's someone who's happy. I want to be like him. So he invited me to come to India and study with him, and so I just passed the center on to someone else, and I came to India. And I stayed with him for 12 years until he passed away, 1982. But in the meantime, he sent me, he trained me and sent me to run a meditation center in Sydney. So, and he also said to me, it's not your dharma to be married, don't even think of it. It's your dharma to serve people, to be a renunciant and to serve people. And that was quite a difficult thing for me to take at first, but he was my teacher, and I knew that he had only my best welfare in mind, and I slowly accepted that this is how he wants me to live my life. So that has influenced my total life. I've been a renunciant for 8 years in the Indian tradition as a sannyasi and 17 years in the Buddhist tradition. So then I lived in an ashram in Ganeshpuri, Maharashtra, 2 hours out of Mumbai, and lived a very classic Indian life, very, very classic, very just chanting Sanskrit texts 4 or 5 hours a day, studying, practicing yoga, meditating, learning a bit of Hindi, learning a bit of Sanskrit. It was a very beautiful life, very, very beautiful, and he was quite well known at that particular time in the 70s and 80s. Has anybody heard of him? No, interesting, different generation. So then he went back to the States and I traveled with him, and during that period there were a lot of physicists and scientists and psychologists and medical practitioners of different types who came and wanted to understand what a meditation master is and what's going on in his brain. So they came along with all of their different scientific things to try to, now they're much more sophisticated now, measure his brain, measure his everything, you know. And he used to just laugh and say, you know, the human mind created all of these instruments, why don't you try to understand the human mind? And we just laugh. And so there's always been this interplay with medicine and the practical applications of meditation, of yoga, which is becoming much more recognized now, and then also the psychological benefits of meditation. So my teacher was very close to one of the high-level Buddhist teachers called the Karmapa from Sikkim. And he came, and I was somehow given the job to look after him and his party, which was a group of Tibetan monks and one in nun. So I looked after them, spent a lot of time with them, and made a strong connection to them. And so after my teacher passed away, so then I was in Sydney, and I was running a very large meditation center. And one of our supporters was a doctor, an oncologist, and he had me coming to the hospital teaching meditation to the patients and mostly the staff, most of the staff burning out. So from the very beginning, I've always been involved with some medical application of yoga and meditation. But at that time, it was mostly meditation, but I always wanted to bring the body back into it because I saw that without taking care of the body, meditation just didn't last for people. And so I always brought, in fact, the ethical, the Eightfold Path and the ethics, all of that had to be brought into it. It couldn't be separated. And then he passed away, and the organization became very political. I didn't like it, and I left. But by that time, I had discovered, as a meditation teacher, that most people who came had some kind of psychological issues, you know, that meditation wasn't appropriate for, couldn't help, and didn't address. And it was like, okay, there's a big gap here, you know. I need to go. And also, there was a big gap in me. I could learn clearly and see that I was okay, you know. I'd had all these amazing spiritual experiences, lived in India for years, but I couldn't integrate into an ordinary Western life, and my family was really distressed with me. They thought their whole parenting had gone terribly awry, and why would I choose to live this kind of life? And my father was lamenting all the time, and I bring them to my teacher, and he was so kind to them and tried to make them feel better because he understood that they were so disappointed that I was living this life. So I went to California, and I studied in an area called Transpersonal Psychology, which at that time was quite popular. I'm not even sure if it's taught now. I think at Naropa Institute they teach something called contemplative psychology. But the basis of it was you had to have a spiritual practice, you had to be very closely linked and studied to a tradition, either Buddhism or yoga. And then you had to bring the psychological mind training aspects of that into the psychology study and compare the two. And that was a big study at that time. And they used to have big conferences, and so I got my training in that, and I came back to Sydney and I started seeing clients. And so I had been known as a leader of a meditation center, and people wanted to have a therapist who taught meditation, so I had a very active practice. But I thought, oh, I'll set aside the yoga and the meditation, you know, I'll just be a counselor. But I found that sitting and just talking, it wasn't enough. You know, I did it for 6 years. And I thought, no, I'm going to go back. I'm going to teach them some yoga, and I'm going to teach them some meditation, and I'm going to teach them how to manage their own conditions. And then, you know, yes, talking is good and it's helpful, but they need to have practices and know how to train and work with themselves. So I started running meditation courses, and I kind of integrated yoga, meditation, and psychology, always with for well-being, you know, looking at well-being. And a friend of mine ran a big corporate program based on all the teachings that we had in India, and I've also worked in corporate environment with people teaching basically the same skills, but for application into a business setting. And then I took up Buddhist studies, because I had been close to this teacher who was a friend of my teacher's. I was impressed by the Tibetans. I thought, okay, I'll look for a teacher. And that particular teacher had also died, and I found some teachers and started to study. And then we had a teacher who came to my house to run a particular teaching in Sydney in the mountains, and I just looked at him. I thought, I know you. And he also responded like, yes, you know. And I said, I want to study with you. He said, well, come right away to Bhutan. He was from Bhutan. he said, I'm going into retreat and, soon, so you need to come soon so we can. And I thought, okay, I'm going to ordain again. So he ordained me in the Tibetan tradition, and then he went in retreat for 4 years. I wasn't able to see him. And Bhutan's an interesting country, quite primitive from my point of view, living in the monasteries. Well, I was one nun with 500 monks, 2 English-speaking people in the place, and a diet that was completely, they live on chilies. So, but that was good, and this teacher is quite wonderful, and I just saw him in Bangkok recently. He came out of another 5 years of meditation retreat and was traveling back from Australia back to Bhutan. I was able to see him again, and that was quite wonderful. So, more recently, I have started to work with a group I moved to Thailand to do retreat because they have beautiful meditation centers. And a friend took me to one in the forest with a beautiful cave. It was just the perfect place. So I spent a year and a half there in the forest. It was very lovely, very beautiful. And then my teacher started saying, you should be teaching, you should be teaching. I wanted to do more retreat. Traditionally, in the Tibetan tradition, they do 3 years of retreat. 3 years, 3 months, 3 days, 3 weeks and 3 days. I hadn't been able to do that because I was looking after my father's affairs. So I was asking him for retreat. He said, no, you have to start teaching now. I need you to be teaching. And he linked me up with this group in Pune, out of the Pune University, they run a very large training called art-based therapy, and they train art-based therapists who use various aspects of the arts, singing, dancing, which of course is in the Indian blood, and music and art, and they apply it. They've really done the research to know the therapeutic outcomes, so they work very skillfully. Wonderful group of people, and they're all his students. So he asked me to start coming and teaching to them, and so they're running a course here with this Banyan group, and mostly I work with the therapist, but then they ask me to do public programs. So, and again, I'm just working with this taking care of your body, your mind, your heart, and today we're going to talk about the heart and the emotions. And particularly if you're a person who works in the caring field and cares for others, then you are exposed to the difficulties, and very often it's trauma. So there can be secondary trauma. So I started working in Thailand in a recovery center, which is mostly Westerners. They come from all over the world, and they're recovering at a certain level. They have to have been clean for a certain amount of time, and then they're recovering from different drug uses. They're all young people, and it really opened my mind about who takes drugs these days, because they were mostly middle class, good upbringing, but something, when you get into it, I worked as a counselor and a meditation teacher and a yoga therapist teaching yoga for anxiety. So again, always linking all the aspects, and discover I had never trained a lot in trauma. I thought trauma was veterans or refugees, and now I discovered trauma is everyone. Do you find that in your students? Yeah, it didn't, not so much. No, maybe in India it's not so bad. I think India has intact family units that hold people growing up much more safely and more secure. Western families are often broken down. There's often, trauma in the childhood. The children weren't really cared for. And, I would work with these young students, affluent, but their emotional life had not really been cared for, and they had a lot of it. And then to escape the pain of that, they're very easily drawn into taking different substances to try to ease the pain. So there's a lot of trauma. And so now we've discovered Bessel van der Kolk, so his work really highlights that yoga is the best way to work with trauma. That talking therapy doesn't work because traumatic events are held in the body, and traumatic memories are held in the body, and they will arise as sickness, or they will arise as painful feelings that people want to escape, and that causes then addictive behaviors. So I find that I'm working now with trauma, with people using a kind of very relaxing, this type of yoga, working with breath. The breath works very effectively. So for the last 2 years I've been working in that particular area. And so when people think of Buddhist, so that's kind of my background and what I do. When people think of Buddhist practice, generally I think they think of meditation, you know, and of course there's what we call calm abiding meditation, the samadhi one-pointedness, which came from the Indian tradition. Very clearly the Buddha practiced that. And then he developed a little more insight, a kind of atma vichar, insight meditation called vipassana. But mostly it's associated with Goenka, but every single Buddhist teacher and every tradition will teach a form of insight meditation, which is examining the nature of who am I, you know, why am I here, what is the purpose of my existence, and these very deep questions. So those two are practiced, of course, very commonly. But the other area that we work on is what we call mind training. So, and this is what is generally falls into the category of Buddhist psychology. So mind training is to use the awareness that's developed through the meditation, and then looking at oneself very carefully and recognizing that we have certain habitual patterns that we could have carried. If you believe in reincarnation, we could have carried from the past, we've carried with us, and these keep arising repeatedly in our relationships and in our life. And in order to progress in the spiritual path, we need to be able to work with these. First of all, we have to identify them, and then we need to know how to apply the antidotes and how to work with them. So that's what we're going to look at today. And I know that you're very familiar with Sutra 1.33. Can anyone recite it in English? Or you can recite it in Sanskrit. Yeah.
Maitri Karuna Mudito Veshanam Sukha Dukha Punya Punya Vishayanam Bhavanata Chitta Prasadanam.
Okay, lovely. So these are called in the different Buddhist traditions, and I've studied and practiced in what we call the Theravada tradition, which is in Thailand, where I live, Laos, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Burma, traditionally practiced. And their emphasis is on sila and discipline. They live very strict monastic vows. And they practice primarily either Vipassana meditation, or they'll practice, some traditions will practice a samadhi, one-pointed meditation to a certain point, a certain realization, and then they will switch over to insight and examination. And then there's the Mahayana tradition, which, so, by the way, do you realize that yoga and Buddhism are the biggest exports from India? I don't know, I think that when your Prime Minister came to the West, I don't know, recently the US, he was himself amazed at how much yoga is everywhere. And it's in every country. And Buddhism, of course, you know, it left India, went to Sri Lanka, then it went north to Vietnam, to Korea. These are all Buddhist countries where Buddhist practice is dominant. But it has a slight different emphasis in this. So the Mahayana has an emphasis on recognizing one's, and this is the work of Thich Nhat Hanh, what he calls interbeing, recognizing one's basic humanity is the same as all beings. And so when we practice in that level, we are practicing so that we can liberate all beings. So at the Theravada level, we come in usually recognizing our own suffering, and we're practicing to escape the suffering through practice, intense practice. The Mahayana level, through meditation, the mind has opened up a little bit more. We recognize our basic humanity and with all others, and we work, and there's a lot more socially active, applied application of the practice in Mahayana. So we find, I took further ordination in Taiwan, and I love it because it's mostly nuns in Taiwan. There are some monks, but in ordination of 500, there were 350 nuns and 150 monks. And they are dynamic, they're well educated, they're dynamic, they're out in the culture, they're affecting people, they're educating, they're creating. There's this amazing organization called Tzu Chi, which was started by one nun, and whenever there's a disaster in the world, she has attracted many medical practitioners, and those medical practitioners at their own expense will go immediately to that place and they will give medical care, and it's all out of compassion. It's an extraordinarily beautiful organization, just the work of one, you know, big-hearted nun. And then there's the Tibetan tradition. So Buddhism went from Kashmir, basically Kashmir or northern India up into Tibet, and there's a lot of very interesting study of, are you familiar with Kashmir Shaivism? Is that? Yeah, so the correlation between Kashmir Shaivism and Tibetan Buddhism is a field of study which is very fascinating. And so Tibetan Buddhism, each group likes to think that it's special in its own way, but if you follow the history, then you see how much Buddha brought from the Brahmanic tradition, the Indian yogic tradition, into his teachings, and then we see that, you know, then it moved up and it went into Tibet, but it had Shaivite roots, and it's quite fascinating. So I find all of that very beautiful, because I'm neither Indian nor Tibetan nor any of those things, so I don't feel, my teachers and encouragers don't feel that you have to take on the cultural identification, the religious identification. That belongs to the people of that tradition, and it's important, and they grow up with it, but we didn't, you know, so we have the freedom to kind of approach it. And that's why I think we find the application of Buddhist psychology being taken now, it's secularized, and there are certain problems with that. Saraswati and we were talking about that, people who want to become meditation teachers and go out and have a career as a meditation teacher. And I used to warn yoga teachers, you don't make a lot of money as a yoga teacher, so keep your day job. And so, I lost my train of thought. So, the secularization of things like aspects of Buddhist teaching, like mindfulness, like the one that we're going to look at today, is being brought into education, being brought into social activist groups. There's a number of organizations who really have taken the application, and there's several psychology paradigms that have been based around Buddhism now, and they're applying these principles, which again we talk about mind training. So we talk about recognizing that we have certain habitual patterns that we carried through. Those are part of our constitution of who we are, and if we can recognize those, we can overcome them. And it's necessary that we overcome them, because in the Theravada tradition, they have outlined very clearly the stages of enlightenment up to what they call the first stream entry, and then further on. And one of the first phases of the subtle jhanas, the subtle states of meditation, involve the complete eradication of anger, hatred, jealousy, and prejudice. And then two more, lust and pride. And it's interesting, lust and pride come later. So I find that quite fascinating. I find it quite highly evolved students who still have pride and they still have lust, but they still can emanate a lot of very good qualities. So first of all, we need to understand that the basis for how can we change our psychological patterns, how can we do this? So the basis of understanding that is that the Buddhist psychology approaches that the essential nature of the mind is pure, it's pure consciousness, it is untainted by negative emotions, it has natural pure awareness, it has the qualities of compassion and wisdom. Now whether we call it Satchitananda or Buddha nature or clear light awareness, many different names in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is much better than the English language. English language is very poor on these kind of descriptive things. So because that is the basis of our human consciousness, we can move back to that, and we are not indelibly affected by these negative emotions. They can be changed. So the path is to recognize that we have negative emotions, and to understand that we can apply certain antidotes, and these qualities are seen as antidotes, and that we can change these negative habits of anger, hatred, jealousy and envy, and prejudice. And we can change them into loving kindness, compassion, so maitri, karuna, compassion, sympathetic joy, mudita, and upekkha, or upeksha. Upeksha is the Sanskrit. I get Pali, I get mixed up now, because we use Pali in Thailand. And so the practice that we're going to look at is to identify that I have, through my makeup, and those of you who I know that you know a lot about Ayurveda here, so we can see that we have a certain constitution, and that constitution will have a predilection to certain negative emotions, and it's part of who we are. And my teacher, when I lived with him, there was just a small group of about 30 Westerners who lived with him for quite a long period of time. So very naturally, you get, little jealousies and little things, as in any close family, in any close group. And I remember once he'd gone on a trip and I felt left out. He didn't invite me, and I went up to him and I said, "I'm leaving." He said, "Yes, go." So then I went back to my office and my desk. I used to work in publications. A little while later he comes up and he comes to me and said, "That's not love, that's jealousy." And I went, I'm embarrassed, I have jealousy. Oh! And I felt so like, oh, I'm a horrible person, I have jealousy. But then I started to focus on jealousy. What is jealousy like, And then I started to, I think I went back to the West at some point, and I thought all the movies are based on jealousy, all the sitcoms are based on jealousy. Jealousy is everywhere in our society. And then I started to see, how does it arise in me, Okay, so I have this quality, so let me start to work with it, So I start to work with it. Now, this is where I suggest we start now. So we recognize that with humility and not with any sense of shame, because it's part of the human condition, we will have one or the other. And if we can recognize it, then through our awareness, through the practice of meditation, the practice of asana, we develop more awareness and we see it arising. Then we have the opportunity to work with it. And then we get into, so we start with the kind of Theravada, we apply an antidote, so I notice that I have anger, so I start to try to practice loving kindness, anger, loving kindness, anger, loving kindness, anger, loving kindness. Then we get into the Mahayana point of view, which is that I'm going to practice for all beings. Well, all beings have anger, and may I wish that all beings be free from anger. And then we go into the Tibetan, which is a tantric tradition and very connected to the Shaivite Tantra of India. Then we discover that there's no distinction between anger and loving kindness, that it's a continuous thread of energy. And then when we start to be able to work with it that way, we recognize I have this extraordinary resource that I can work with. And we work with it more deeply. So this is what I'm encouraging, that, if this is interesting, I know you all have your own practices and your point of view. This may or may not be useful, but perhaps this is one way of working. So right now, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the different emotions. And we need the enthusiasm and the willingness to recognize that we have one or the other of these. So I'll talk a little bit about anger. So anger can manifest as bitter resentment, aggression, ill will. Now when I had counseling practice, it was fascinating to notice that these women whose husband had left them for a younger woman, their whole thrust of life was the bitterness they had towards their husband and what he'd done to them. And it was very hard in counseling work to get them, try to point it out, get to see it's destroying you. It's not doing anything to them, it's destroying you. And my father, who I adored, is such a sweet man, he hated my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, and to the very end of his life. So he had this hatred. And it's somehow, he lived to 96, he was a kind man, but somehow having this hatred for my brother-in-law made him feel strong. He was justified in hating this man. And So we can hang on to these negative emotions because it's who we think we are, you know, if we don't have awareness, you know, that we can bring into it. So that's anger. And the opposite is loving kindness and friendliness to all, being able to, you know, really send out and approach people with kindness. And so we'll do these practices. So the next one is hatred, and that manifests as dislike. Someone who you feel that way towards, you secretly wish that they would disappear from your world so you could be happy. So just check whether, you know, yes, there's a degree of that in my life. I have a degree of that in my life. I won't even talk about American politics. So, okay, next one is jealousy and envy. So it manifests as competitiveness. Someone has the position that you wanted, the lifestyle, the marriage. You find fault with that person all the time. Maybe they got the job that you wanted, or you find fault with that person, and secretly you kind of want to pull them down, you know. This is actually interesting. When I went to live in Australia, Australians have this thing called the tall puppy syndrome. And anybody? No, you wouldn't know Australia. Well, you know them. Yeah. So they have this cultural tendency to cut people down. Anybody who raises up, they will cut them down with very sharp language, you know. Everybody should be equal. Nobody should think they're any better. That's a very American thing, you know. And they're very anti-American. Australians can be quite anti-American. So, but they have this, you know, it's like a cultural norm that you're jealous of anybody who rises up, and it stops the culture from thriving, you know. Unfortunately, when they did the Olympics, they did a really good job, and a lot of that cultural, it comes from a cultural cringe of not feeling good about themselves. A lot of that was eliminated. But so, okay, so it's a very common factor in our life. So the opposite of that is a sympathetic joy, to see somebody who has that and just rejoice. Isn't that wonderful they have that, you know? In fact, when we want to practice this, we see somebody and there might be a little of kind of envy, and then immediately, if you've been practicing, you think, isn't that wonderful that they're doing that? I'm so happy that they're doing it. I hope so many people benefit from it. And you really fill your heart with joy for that person, and it becomes a wonderful practice. Generosity of spirit towards others. But unless we have recognized, unless I knew that I had jealousy and accepted it and started to work with it, I would never have found this wonderful practice, you know, which I now really enjoy doing. And the last one is discrimination and prejudice. So towards certain people who you may feel superior to them, they are somehow inferior, unworthy, due to their position, their race, their caste, being emotionally overactive to changing life events, you know. I've lost my position, and let's say, you know, again, American politics are just breeding this in the world right now, which is really concerning, you know, concerning to the whole world because it's affecting people. So I see a lot of social activist groups really wanting to work against this principle now, which is what we're doing here too. So I would like you to turn to someone next to you and just do two, even though, let's see how we go, it might have to be three, but just two of you, and discuss this a little bit now. Oh, actually, let's take a little bit of time. Just sit for a minute. So I'm sure most of you, all of you would have your own practice. But I'd like you just to sit and look into your heart now. So do whatever you do to calm your breath and to calm your body. And then look into your emotional body, your heart. But these emotions often have a physical correlation, so they will manifest as some kind of sensation, some part of the body. And just reflect for a moment of these four qualities. Which one would I see arises in my life and in my mind? Which often what I see is part of my constitutional character. Okay, so now I'd like you to turn to someone close to you and just, I'll give 5 minutes for each to have a little bit of discussion, see if you can identify which of these you think you would like, at least for now, to identify. And I'll just tell one other story. I was in a 3-month meditation retreat which Buddhist monastics do during the monsoon season. I was in a monastery in Perth, and I had this pain in my felt like liver gallbladder, and it was really painful, and I started to just meditate on it, focus on it. And I just relaxed and I meditated, and I had a memory when I was living with my teacher in Bhutan, and his attendant was very jealous of the way that my teacher was putting me as a nun forward. And in that culture, nuns were submissive to monks, and I was in no way. Nothing in my culture had ever told me to be like that. And my teacher was not telling me to be like that. So it irritated this monk, you know, so he started to do things to undermine me, you know, just very kind of mean-spirited and jealous. And there was nothing I could do because I was dependent on. So I just kind of swallowed this anger at him. And when I uncovered it in this meditation retreat, I completely changed my practice. I spent the next 3 months practicing loving kindness because I realized that I had, you know, succumbed to a kind of anger, and that, you know, as many women do, you know, depending on our cultural context, we can't express it, we can't forgive, there's nothing we can do about it. So we internalize it, and it makes us sick. And I knew if I didn't do something about it, it was making me sick. So, okay, now, find your own. Okay, so I hope you've all found something to work with. Something juicy. Okay. So now let's go over the antidotes. So we have anger, we understand. And the antidote is loving kindness. So a warm capacity to feel warmth and goodwill towards others. And when we do this practice, so we will do the formal practice. So there's 2 ways of practicing. There's a formal practice that you take on a daily basis and decide, I'm going to practice this for some time until I see a change in my nature and in my character and my habits. And then there's what we call an on-the-spot. So as the emotion arises inside, then I start to work with the antidote. So these are the antidotes. So the antidote to anger is loving kindness. And we always start the practice with ourselves. So if we don't have the capacity to have friendliness and kindness towards ourselves, we can't possibly extend that to someone else. Now, the Dalai Lama for many years has been working with a group of scientists called the Mind and Life group, and it's groups of physicists, scientists, neuroscientists, educators, people who come together with him often in Dharamsala, but sometimes he used to come to the West. Now he's not traveling very much. And they present certain kind of conditions, like they would present mental illness. And they would talk about how they diagnose and identify the different mental illnesses, how they are treated, what the research says is what is beneficial. And then the Dalai Lama would sit with his group of monks, and then they would contemplate, and then they would come back and talk about, well, we see this this is the way we see it from the Buddhist point of view. And they would exchange points of view. Now this has been going on for about 20 years. And as a result of this work, the understanding of neuroplasticity has evolved very strongly, understanding that the brain can be changed. So the basis for the effectiveness of all of these practices is understanding the brain can be changed. There's neuroplasticity. It's not just who I am. It's not just my character. So, but we always start with ourselves, and many of us are much more kinesthetic, or we have this, what we call now in psychology, you would call swadhyaya, but we call it interoception, the ability to look inside and see how my emotions and my nervous system and my mind is doing. We call this interoception, the ability to catch and observe. And then if we develop this skill, which of course we do through yoga, but some people have the tendency more towards that than others. But then once we see it, then we can apply the remedy. Then we know what practice we should do, we know what we can do, and we will identify. So we start always with ourselves. So for some time we develop, if we feel that we have anger, then we would also direct that anger towards ourselves. So in psychology there's this phenomenon called the inner critic. So this critical voice that says, oh, you're hopeless, you can't do anything, you never do anything right. And when the Dalai Lama started to work with psychologists, they had to explain this phenomena of self-hatred to him for a long time, because it does not exist in the Tibetan culture. And I don't know if it's very strong in the Indian culture. Is it? What do you think, Saraswati?
I don't know if there's a word for it.
There's not even a word for it? Self-hatred, no. Interesting. Okay. I think some people say it comes from the Judeo-Christian, idea of sin, that I'm a sinner. And that one takes that on, sense of I'm inherently bad. And sometimes it comes from our parenting. So a parent will have a voice that says, you're hopeless, you can never get anything right. And the child will internalize that voice, and it's speaking in their head all the time as what we call the inner critic. So we need to work with ourselves around making, identifying, do we have this tendency, to not have a joyful, supporting, loving, caring attitude first of all, towards ourselves. So the practice that we do, and we will do the whole full practice. We have sheets that we'll hand out, and we'll do the full practice so you can see what it feels like. But we will say things to ourselves like, may I be free from enmity and safe from inner and outer harm. So we find the language, we write our own language according to how it sounds best for us. May I be happy and peaceful. May I be healthy and strong in my body and mind. May I be able to protect my happiness and care for myself joyfully. So if we decide that anger is a factor for us, and that anger turns in on ourselves, then we mitigate that by applying the antidote of loving kindness for ourselves. And then in all of these, we apply first for ourselves, and then we extend out to our loved ones, who are the dear ones in our lives. And we can look at their face, and we know that they're struggling. We know them well. We know they're suffering. We know their unhappiness. And so we picture them in front of us, and may you be free from, may you be happy. May you have the ability to live your life in a way that you have well-being and happiness and contentment. And we find the language based on the conditions that we recognize. And then we go out a little bit further. So then we have a network of people that we interact with, like your associates here, in our world, at the shops, in our workplace, whatever. We have people that we interact with. So then we also want to extend this to them. They suffer from anger, and we want to learn how to, first of all, to ourselves and to our dear ones, which is easier, well, sometimes more difficult. Families, relationships are very challenging for practice. My teacher used to say he'd have these 3 retreats, and he would always just make sure that there was one kind of crazy, really difficult person in that group that drove everybody crazy, because it was really good for their practice. So I was just reading, I think it was the Dalai Lama said, you know, if you're really serious about practicing, then difficult relationships are about the most fertile ground for your practice that you can find. So, okay, so then we go out further. So the people that we interact with in the day, you know, we start to wish them in our practice. So we wish them, you know, when we start to incorporate this from a formal practice into more of our life. And then we go out further. We go out to all the people that are in our milieu, in our circle of where we live, and may they all, just like me, they wish to be happy. May they all be happy. May they all have well-being. And then we go to the difficult one. So after some time and after some training, it's not like we immediately go to the difficult one. We practice and practice and practice. It's like a muscle that we develop in our heart. And then we work with a really difficult person in our life. And then people say to me, well, does it really affect them if we do this? And then I heard this quite fascinating story by a teacher. He was at an intersection and saw an automobile accident. And somebody was injured in the car. So he started to do loving kindness prayer for this person. You could see it was a woman. He started to pray for her, and he was a practitioner, and started to wish, may you be healthy, may you recover, may all of your needs be met, doing this practice. Well, the woman was out of her body, but she could feel it, and she could feel it coming from this person. And she could see, she's not in her physical body, but she could see his car. She remembered his license plate. Later, after she had recovered from her accident, she contacted this person and said, I want to thank you for saying that prayer. It really helped me at the time. So people always say, you know, does it help that person? Well, we don't know exactly, but what we do know is it changes our dynamic of relationship to that person. So my own experience is that, yes, it changes the thread of ill will between me and that person. And maybe they're going to change or not going to change. We can't change people, that's their choice. But we can change the energy that we direct towards them, and that may very well change the nature of the communication and the relationship. So, okay, so self, dear ones, associates, kind of neutral ones, people in the bigger circle, and then the difficult ones. That's the pattern. Okay, so the next one is dislike or hatred, and the antidote for that is compassion. And we're going to do another compassion practice from the Tibetan tradition today, just so you can sample what these practices are like. And compassion, and it's very interesting, compassion is not sympathy. So it's empathy, but it's not sympathy. And can anyone explain the difference in that? Okay, sympathy is dualistic. I'm helping this person, this poor person. So there is a sense of I'm somehow better than this person. And there's a condescension in there. And an empathy is just feeling their suffering. I could be like that. How would I feel if I'm like that? So that's real compassion, real empathy, without any dualistic of helping them. So for those of us who work in the social activism area and work with people, really need to watch our attitude. Do we have this sense that we are doing something? So Saraswati and I just had a talk about this, because that gets us into a lot of trouble. That sense of I gets us into a lot of capacity to take on some energy from these people. So we need to if we're working in this area, and this is what I'm working with all the time with these people in social activist area, people in Pune working with suicide prevention, working with homelessness in the slums. They took me into the slums, into areas I would never have had the opportunity to be in, and see the people that they work with and see how they work. It's very, very compassionate work. And here in Chennai, this group works with, they provide homes for women who've been made homeless through domestic violence. So compassion is, wish for yourself, for ourself and others to be. So again, we need to work, may I be free from suffering. We need to start with ourselves. May I be free from suffering. What is my suffering? But we need to be able to recognize when it arises. What is it? What is my suffering? And may I be free from it. And wish for ourselves and others to be free of suffering. So may those dear ones in my life be free from suffering. May those that I interact with kind of neutrally in my day and my daily life, may they be free from suffering. May those in my largest circle, may all beings be free from suffering. Now, we'll do a practice at the end, and there's a belief that in order to be able to really extend compassion, we need to know what it was like to be on the receiving end of compassion. So in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they talk a lot about remembering our mother. And then the Dalai Lama, when he came to the West, he discovered, well, I think some people have problematic relationships with their mothers, So maybe this isn't so good, but hopefully if it is, that's the first area you work with. So the compassion that a mother has for the child. And we remember what it was like to be on the receiving end of someone, or maybe a grandparent, maybe someone else in our life, a friend, someone who really cared for us, a mentor, a teacher, somebody who really cared and was there to support our well-being and rejoice for us to develop. So we recall what that was like. So we feel that we were on the receiving end of that kind of compassion, and therefore we know how to extend it to others. So when we practice this, we try to identify that we have what it feels like to have received compassion. And we'll do that practice. Okay, so may I be free from suffering, may I be free from stress, may I be free from worry and fear, may I be protected from harm and danger, the kind of things that we say to ourselves, or self-compassion. So then the next one is jealousy and envy, and it's in our society, competitiveness. Someone has the position we wanted. So we learn to generate sympathetic joy for others' good fortune. Isn't that wonderful? They're doing such good things in the world. And a generosity of spirit towards others. So may I rejoice in others' successes. I see someone, instead of thinking, well, how come them and not me? How wonderful. And because what they say in Buddhist, in terms of cause and effect, if we can't generate happiness and rejoicing for someone else, we ourselves will never be able to have what it is that we feel jealous about. If we stay with jealousy, we block out of our ability to ever have that in our life. If we learn to rejoice for others who have it, then we move ourselves very naturally into a position for that to become natural for us as well. So, may I celebrate others' achievements. May I or they never cease from enjoying happiness and freedom. We find the language to really, those close to us, all, the same group of people ourselves, those dear to us, our working people, bigger circle, and then all beings. May they continue. So one of the rejoicing practices is to think of all the teachers and the respected people who have influenced you in your life. So for me, it's been the Dalai Lama. I've been able to, when he was coming to Sydney and I was living there, I worked with his organization and met him on several occasions, and I'm terribly, terribly inspired by him, by his example. And when we look at what he does in the world now, he does constant multi-faith work. He really is. He pulled himself out of the head of the Tibetan government, and then he just became the the carer for everyone. And so if you look at his schedule, he'll be speaking to a Muslim group here, a Christian group there, a Jain group there, working all the time on multi-faith work and trying to bring together the idea that we all have the same human condition, we all want the same kind of happiness, and promoting this sense of unity amongst all people. Okay, so that's sympathetic joy. And the last one is discrimination and prejudice. And this is particularly important if we're working with people who are at risk groups and suffering, that we don't have any sense of, I'm helping them, I'm something special, I'm helping these poor people. So very important that we understand it could be me. How come we, by some grace, it's not me, but I know what it feels like. So equanimity, we understand that all people want the same kind of happiness as we do, the same opportunities. We open our mind to wishing that all could be equal, that all should have the same opportunities. The same, when we sit down to eat, we wish that all people could have the same meal. We generate ourselves into endless forms, offering the food to all beings. Okay. So we're going to do a little bit of practice now. So set yourself into a meditative pose, something comfortable where you can sit for a short while. And you can have your eyes open or closed, but I'm sure that all of you have your own practice, so begin with something that collects your mind and body, awareness of your breath, with an intention to sit with the focus for this brief period of time. And observe if this discussion has activated any particular sensations in your body or feelings. Just notice that. Acknowledge them with a sense of ease and acceptance. Now ask yourself, what do I really want? What do I really want? I'm constantly being driven by this desire. Is it a new iPhone? Is it a new bike? A new position? The ability to travel to some place? What are all these short-term desires that are arising and compelling me into action all the time? Now go a little bit more deeply into your heart. Underneath these passing desires that arise and pass away and cause us to act, sometimes without even thinking, again, inquire to yourself, what do I really want? What is my deepest desire? You're sitting here, you could have been doing other things this evening. Why did you come here for this discussion? Looking for something, looking for some kind of deeper happiness is underlying all of our pursuits. When you really sit with this understanding, maybe you can recognize that feeling. Most of the time we don't look for it or see it. Right now, inside of ourselves, every breath, every movement, every impulse is looking for happiness. This feeling of wanting to be happy, not wanting to suffer. Getting what we want, not getting what we want. Or getting what we don't want. All of this is here in this feeling of looking for happiness. But sometimes we have some confusion about what really causes happiness. And out of a lack of clarity, we act in ways, out of ignorance, that rather than causing us happiness, causes some kind of disturbance. Out of a delusion of ignorance, we think we're acting in a wholesome way, but in fact, we may generate a negative emotion. This is the human condition. No shame around this. This is simply the human condition. So wish deeply in your heart, may I have real happiness and the causes of happiness. So happiness doesn't arise unless we have created a cause through our actions and behaviors, and the happiness arises as a result. Do this with genuine love and compassion for yourself. And repeat in your own language, in your own words, may I have genuine happiness and the causes of happiness. So being able to recognize what brings us genuine happiness is love with wisdom. Keep repeating to yourself, may I have genuine happiness and the causes of happiness. Now just relax and you can open your eyes and don't focus on anything, just rest in natural awareness of your own basic human goodness. Which is the source of these positive emotions. So Kartik was kind enough to type this up, so can we pass it around so that I think there's not enough for everyone, but you can share.
I've also sent it on the Sangha.
I think it would be hard to read this on your phone. It's quite... So, let me just ask you, is there any question about what we've covered so far? Now we're going to go into doing a couple of the actual practices of loving kindness and compassion. Do you have any question or need any clarification about the emotions and their antidotes and why it works and why we could practice it and what benefit we would get? Do you already practice something like this? How do you practice? I saw it's your topic for Australia, I saw.
Yes.
So what kind of practices are you going to encourage people to do?
Like you were talking about many levels at which we can do the practice. One is the actual practice of cultivating the bhavana, Maitrika. And the other is to understand it. So when there's a situation where I feel jealous and
Yes.
feel to myself, to understand from where it is coming. Then actually cultivating it with people in situations, in contexts that we are actively engaged with. So that many levels that we could practice. And depending on the student and the depth of their own sadhana, I think we can work simultaneously at these levels or go from one to the other. So I would also connect it with the yama niyamas.
Oh, good.
So then those are well established or better understood, then this becomes almost like a natural, effortless process. Yeah, so that's all.
Very good. Okay. So, this is just a typical way that's practiced. This is primarily from the Theravada, which is Thailand, Burma, Mahayana. Tibetan does it slightly differently, but we will do a practice in the Tibetan tradition, just so you can see. So again, we're going to practice loving kindness meditation. So this is to antidote our anger. I don't think there's any of us who don't have a degree of anger. Certainly not myself. Okay, so we'll do the practice. So I want you to kind of read along with me. So the ones that are in bold, so we'll read those out together. I'll read the part that's in the light type, and the bold ones we'll read out together. So we're talking to ourselves, we're practicing. This is a practice. We sit in a comfortable meditation posture. And again, focus on your breath for some time until your mind becomes calmer. So focus more on the doing than reading. It gets a little complicated. You will need to read the bold print. Now take a look into your heart. If you find any disturbing emotions there, desire, anger, jealousy, sadness, frustration, observe them without any judgment. As you continue to breathe, let these emotions dissolve with the out breath. Just like black clouds dissolve when the sun shines through. So with our awareness, we can dissolve the effect of those emotions that linger when we aren't paying attention. Now allow feelings of warmth and goodwill towards yourself to arise. Try to see your face as if you are looking in a mirror. Let your body, mind, and heart be filled with loving kindness. Repeat to yourself. Now let's do this together. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be free from danger and enmity. May I be free from mental suffering. May I be free from physical suffering. May I be well and happy. So sometimes in psychology, we have what we call a chair method. We'll separate the inner vulnerable child from, say, someone who might be a critical voice. And we'll set that critical voice outside, and then we'll find a nurturing, kind aspect of ourselves, and we will repeat this to the child. So many people do have wounded children inside. They were never cared for by their parents, or their emotional well-being was never nurtured. And so they can be 50 years old and have a vulnerable little child inside. So we need to help them to find this voice to speak to the child in a very loving, caring way, and reparent themselves. Now bring into your mind those near and dear to you. See them in front of you and embrace them with rays of love and warmth. So visualize your dear ones around you, wishing them happiness and fulfillment. Visualizing them, repeat silently. Let's do this together. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be free from danger and enmity. May you be free from mental suffering. May you be free from physical suffering. May you be peaceful and at peace. And let your voice be very gentle. That nurturing mother-father voice, very gentle. Now think of your extended friends and family. Seeing them in front of you, embrace them with warmth and affection. Not expecting anything in return. So visualize them around you. Wish them happiness and fulfillment of their desires. And repeat. Let's do it together. Gentle voice. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be free from danger and enmity. May you be free from mental suffering. May you be free from physical suffering. May you be peaceful and at peace. Now think of people you encounter daily in your life, at work, at the shops, on the train, on the streets, your neighbors. Feel that just like you, they wish for happiness and have difficulties in their life. Visualize them, wish them happiness and well-being. Repeat. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be free from danger and enmity. May you be free from mental suffering. May you be free from physical suffering. May you be peaceful and at peace. Now we extend out a little further, and I watch the news because I like to see the news of who's suffering in the world, because otherwise I can live in my own little bubble in my monastery in the forest in Thailand, and I can think, oh, the world is good. But so I like to watch the news, and I like to see the Rohingyas who are suffering, and I like to see the people who are suffering, because then this practice becomes very real for me. But I have to say, when I first arrived to India, I had never seen poverty. I arrived in Calcutta during some Bangladeshi, there were a lot of refugees, and on the street, I had never seen that kind of thing in the place I had grown up in the US, and it really broke my heart, really broke my heart. And I think that's honestly why I took up this work. I just think that I saw human suffering. And here in India, you see it all the time. You know, you see it, and probably it becomes hard to look at. If we want to develop this practice, then we think of these people. Think of the people that you pass. You know, sometimes you give them a bit of money, and you know, you just think of them. So in this part of the practice, we think of all those people. People throughout the world who are suffering. People who you see on television who are suffering in war-torn countries, who lose their beloved family members to bombers, or who live in prisons and nursing homes without friends or comfort. Think of people who live on the streets without food or shelter. Understand that they are no different from me, with the same needs and desire for happiness. Wish that all their needs and desires be fulfilled. Repeat. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be free from danger and enmity. May you be free from mental sufferings. May you be free from physical suffering. May you be peaceful and at peace. So now we bring to mind, and mind you, you know, you don't do all of the, you can do this whole practice, but it's better to start with yourself and practice with yourself for some time. Then go out a little bit further. And before you go to the difficult person, be sure that you've really been able to work. This is a muscle, you know, it's a muscle of loving kindness. It's something we develop in ourselves through practice. We use it, we use it, we use it, and then it's available to us. So now bring into your mind a person with whom you have difficulty, who causes some problems for you. See that person in front of you and understand that just like you, they too wish for happiness and to avoid suffering. Feel your heart open towards them and wish that they have all their desires fulfilled and have happiness in their life. So really see them and understand they have some hardship. That's why they behave the way they do. You know? Their behavior may be unskillful and harmful, but I understand the suffering that's underneath that, and I can tolerate it. Unless it harms you, so boundaries, of course. But feel your heart open towards that person and wish that they have all their desires fulfilled and have happiness in their lives. Send them waves of loving kindness and repeat silently, but we'll repeat out loud. So visualize that person that you have difficulty with. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be free from danger and enmity. May you be free from mental suffering. May you be free from physical suffering. May you be peaceful and at peace. Okay, and just look at your heart now. So notice how your heart feels from doing this practice. And congratulate yourself for making the effort. The Dalai Lama always describes this this kind of what they call bodhisattva practice. When we practice for the benefit of others, it's unselfish selfishness. Anyway, we benefit. Okay, so just notice, how does your heart feel from doing this practice? So you could decide, I'm going to do this practice for some time and just see the effect of it, if that suits you, if it's of interest. And you'll see the effect. Now, in the Tibetan or Mahayana tradition, which incorporates China, Korea, Vietnam, have you ever seen a Kuan Yin statue? Do they have any? Is there anyone here? No Chinese Buddhists here. No, okay. Beautiful Kuan Yin statue. So, originally Avalokiteshvara he was a bodhisattva at the time of the Buddha, his realization. And he had a vow that he would relieve the suffering of all beings. And then somewhere along the line, he underwent a sex change in Asia. So you'll see in Hong Kong or Taiwan, or we have some in Thailand as well. You'll see these beautiful statues of this female figure of the Buddha of Compassion, of Kuan Yin, and she's holding a vase with water pouring out of it, and that's her water of compassion. And it's a beautiful figure. So people who do this practice, they can choose whatever figure of the Buddha of Compassion evokes some feeling for them. So there's a mantra of this practice, so I've written it on the board, and you've probably seen or heard it around. Now for Tibetan Buddhist practitioners, the Dalai Lama is considered to be a living Buddha of compassion. So we consider, and if we look at the way he lives his life, we can find no fault with the way he cares for people, and all people, not only the Tibetan people in any way at all. And I often think, when I work with people who are carers and work in the service, serving others, and we talk about the need for practice. The Dalai Lama, I remember once seeing a video of him and his daily morning practice. He let them into his room, and they're photographing him, and he does his meditation. And then he gets on his walker, you know, his, one of those walking machines, you know. And he does his exercise, and he does all of this so that he can do the work that he does. If he doesn't care for his body, and care for his mind, and care for his heart, he cannot do that work. So and now he used to do things in the evening. Now he said, I don't do any evening. I practice in the morning, I practice in the evening. I give teachings in the daytime. So he sees people, he does public teachings. He's traveling a little bit now. I think I just saw he was in Eastern Europe or somewhere. But he structures his life so the practice is structured into his life. Otherwise, I see with all of my teachers, they cannot do this work of serving others unless they make their own practice part of their life. Now, I know it's difficult because those of you who are serving others, you're serving your family, your children, and you have a lot of responsibility. But somehow you carve out a certain amount of time, usually first thing in the morning is very good. I find because I just wake up before other people wake up, and it's very quiet, and I can sit up wherever I am in my bed, and I can do an hour, half hour of practice. And then the day starts, and nobody really knows what I've been doing, and it's not, not making a big statement. If I'm living with others, I'm just quietly doing it. But early in the morning, it's very quiet, and it's conducive to doing practice. So this practice is the Buddha of Compassion. So again, sit in a meditative posture. And I'd like you to just look inside and check the state of your heart. And I would like you to think back of conditions or people in your life who have treated you with unconditional love, kindness and compassion. Perhaps it was your mother, your grandmother, an aunt, a friend, a teacher, someone who really touched your heart and really was totally there to support your moving forward in your life, support your well-being, support your development as a human being. I would like you to just recall someone. There may be more than one, and it's like they're behind you. They're standing behind you and above your head, and they're your mentor, your benefactor, who are always there supporting you. And you remember those conditions where they really supported you, and you feel what that feels like in your body to be the recipient of that kind of incredibly empowering compassion. And then we imagine around us our dear ones, all the different classes of beings, the dear ones, the family members, the workers around us. And we imagine in the sky in front of us the arising of a being of compassion. And you can configure that in any way that suits your belief system. Be a bright light, it could be whatever works for you. And we're going to recite the mantra of the Buddha of Compassion. The mantra is Om Mani Padme Hum. So I'll sing it, and when you get the tune, you just join me. We'll sing it for some time. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme. Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 Mani Padme Hum. Om 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 Mani Padme Mani Padme Hum. Om 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 Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Continue chanting, and as we chant, the chant evokes the loving kindness and compassion out of the Buddha of compassion and rays of compassion. Continue chanting Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani. Start coming towards us, and they fill us and they fill the people all around us with absolute compassion and release of all of our suffering and fear. Ni Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om 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 Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om 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 Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om 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 Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om 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 Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om 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 Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om 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 Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om 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 Mani Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om 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 Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Continue chanting and feel that you're being bathed with waves and waves of compassionate light, filling your heart and dissolving all suffering and unhappiness. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Padme Hum. Om Mani 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 Padme Hum. Mani Padme
Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum.